And welcome along to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. I'm Rob Staton. Today, delighted to say I've been joined by Brian Nemhauser from Hawkblogger. And it's kicking off a big week of debate on the channel. A lot of streams coming up. Jeff Simmons is going to be with us on Wednesday at 2 o'clock Seattle time. So put that in your diary too. Lots to discuss regarding the Seahawks past, present, and future at the moment. If you want to join in via the live chat, you can do that. I had a word with Geno Smith earlier today, and he promised to throw a touchdown against Pittsburgh for every super chat that we get tonight. So that is an incentive and a half for you to get involved in that today. Brian, just to start with a nice, easy question, and welcome along, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
I'm going to give you a nice, easy one to settle you in. Just sum up where the Seahawks are as a franchise right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question of the day, isn't it? For me, I think the Seahawks are at a steady decline state and at a point of reset. I think that this is a franchise that has very few young players that are on the ascent, and they are not good enough right now to contend for a ring. And when you get those two factors together at the same time, that's usually a pretty good indicator that you need to kind of start over again. So that's my assessments. We'll get into, I'm sure, more details, but that's kind of where I see it.
And I suppose the follow-up question to that is what you constitute as, maybe sort of restarting a little bit or resetting. To what extent does that mean wholesale changes, or does that mean a coaching change, a coach and a GM change, a quarterback change, just refocusing philosophy? What does change look like to you?
Yeah. So at the most basic, it's about roster and personnel. I mean, any sports, it doesn't really matter. Coaching, all those things matter a lot, or can matter a lot, but talent almost always wins. And you have to be essentially the way I think about it, Rob, is the more talent you have on a roster, not even necessarily the starters, but the more talent you have on the roster, the more error you have built into your capability of still being a contending great team. The less talent you have on the roster, the more that has to go right for you to actually contend. And in some cases, no matter how much things go right, you don't have enough talent to contend. So I think talent is the primary, and that's, I wrote in my morning after column, whenever it was, a few days ago, the only two players to me that I would not really take calls on right now, if another team were looking, are DK Metcalf and Darrell Taylor. They're young. They have potential to be elite at their position, at high value positions. And I would not move either of those two guys. Everybody else I would be open to. That does not mean that they all have to move, but I would not hold on to any of them just to keep them. I'm sure we'll talk about Russell and the implications there. But real quick, just the other part of this is, once you talk about resetting the roster, then you do have to ask, who do you trust to do that? Do you want the same coach in place? Do you want the same GM in place to make those decisions? And also, in this situation, you're talking about a coach who's also kind of the owner of all football decisions. So you're really talking about the whole football operation and whether you want to reset that. So I'm open to any and all change across that. It's a good debate, which of those pieces I would personally choose to change versus what maybe you choose or other people. I don't think there's one right way. I just have personal preferences.
And I think it's interesting that we're even having to have this conversation. That we're actually, we're 5 weeks into an NFL season, and we're talking about how we'd like the rebuild to go in 2022. And that's a sad thing, I think, that the Seahawks are in this position now, that I don't think anybody would have guessed. I think even after 2018, at the start of the reset, I think 2018 was a positive year. People have got their opinions on how it ended against Dallas, but I felt that was a positive first step in terms of this is a team that's going to change. And I don't think if you'd have said to anybody at the end of that season that in 3 years will you be spending mid-season debating whether Schneider and Carroll should go, whether Russell should go, which are the pieces that you're going to keep for the next, iteration of the Seahawks franchise. Yeah, that to me is both sad, but also the reality of where we're at.
It is. And I mean, sports are cyclical, and I think the Seahawks have had a very rare length of uptime in terms of being, competing, contending team. Even, the Saints with Drew Brees, who's, if not the best quarterback who ever played, one of the best, had losing seasons. They didn't make the playoffs. They were under 500, right? So the Seahawks had never really had that. They had 1 year where they didn't make the playoffs. And there's, again, as we talked about earlier, there's different ways to rebuild or approach it. And the Seahawks attempted to basically keep some of their best players, add around them, a lot of times through trade, through veteran acquisition, not as much through the draft. I think they seem to value, especially early picks, less than a lot of other teams. And you being a draft expert, I'm sure have some points of view on that. And to some extent, it worked. I mean, I think you can say that they sustained success longer than almost any other franchises have been able to do. You compare that to something like the 49ers, where after 2013, when the Seahawks beat them in the NFC Championship, and the 49ers were, if not equally as talented as the 2013 Seahawks, they were damn close, right? They went in the tank, right? They lost players, they changed coaches, they were winning 3 or 4 games sometimes, getting very high draft picks. And now, or in the last few years, really started to get youthful, ascending talent that was just teaming through their roster. And they almost won a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback. That's how talented they were. So similar, the Rams were similar, went low to go high. So the Seahawks took a different path. Even 2018 was not really a reset. That was kind of a reload. And I think that we're at the point where this is like the Lofa Tatupu 2008, maybe 2010, where it's you really need to just churn the wheel and get a lot of fresh new talent in there.
It's interesting you mentioned the rivalry, that Seahawks Niners 2012, 2013, 2014. It was even a bit of it brewing at the end of 2011 as well. And you just sort of think at that time, this is going to be an epic, rivalry for years to come. And as you mentioned, within no time at all, the Seahawks had seen the Niners off. It was very enjoyable at the time. I kind of miss it now. Both teams were so built very similarly, very physical, very enjoyable clashes. That was the premier contest in the NFL. It's the one that everybody wanted to watch. I remember people describing in week 2 of the 2013 season, it was the biggest game of the regular season in week 2. It was the biggest regular season game in Seahawks history and stuff like that. Guy, you miss those times. I think we're going to, over the years, we'll do a lot of reminiscing about those times. I have to show this quote because I know that it's going to irk you a lot.
Okay.
And it is from Al. He says, "How lovely is it to see Creed Humphrey playing so well?"
Rob, I have to ask, because I am not a draft expert. I used to watch a bunch of college football, and life happens, and I've had to pare back where I spend my time. So that's not a place I spend a bunch of time. But I watched enough pre-draft, and I had enough of I read enough pre-draft to have an idea of where I felt like there was some talent in the draft. And also an assessment of what was available free agency and where the Seahawks roster was. And to me, center was oh my God, if you can get a young, ascending, potential Pro Bowl center in the middle of this line, that could just be a game-changing addition. And centers tend to fall, and the Seahawks don't have a first-round pick. So maybe this could all work out. I don't know where your head was, but we have our live reaction pod up on our YouTube channel for folks that want to check it out. And I gave that draft pick an F when they picked D. Eskridge. And it had zero to do with D. Eskridge. Zero. D. Eskridge, I think it made sense in a lot of cases for what the Seahawks needed for this type of offense. My assessment at the time was the Seahawks were again picking small over big, similar to when they went Jimmy Graham over Max Unger. And missing just a golden opportunity to set up the offensive line for years to come. And I hoped I was wrong. It's not looking like I was so far.
Yeah, I think the draft this year, I didn't personally have a massive issue with the D. Eskridge pick because I figured that it was part of the Waldron changes and that it was going to function into that. And I thought D. Eskridge is one of those players that the first time you actually watched him play, you were just blown away. And I can remember I'd not watched him because you don't get access to Western Michigan tape and games over in the UK.
Yeah.
And someone said, "Hey, check this guy out." And then I watched it and was blown away. And then the very next day I interviewed Jim Nagy, and it was just a coincidence that I was interviewing him the next day, and he brought up D. Eskridge without any prompting. So you were thinking, this is, and spoke glowingly of him. So immediately I'm thinking I need to check, and then checked him out and I thought, what a great player. But at the same time, I've always felt they needed to shift resources to the defensive line. It was a particularly strong center class, and whether it was Creed Humphrey or Quinn Miners or the guy's name is completely, the one who was at Ohio State. There was several centers who could have been drafted by the Seahawks. They ignore the position. They end up with Kyle Fuller at center. And then you're saying, and you've made this point, I think, brilliantly on Twitter, what would you rather have? Creed Humphrey right now and Freddie Swain is your, bona fide number 3, or would you rather have D. Eskridge and Kyle Fuller with Swain as kind of like the number 3 anyway, because Eskridge is injured? That's indicative of what the issue is with the Seahawks, the problems they've had in the draft. They've got themselves into unnecessary problems. I want to play this clip, Brian, for you may well have seen it. Many people may have seen this. I want to know to what extent you agree with this.
They're not good. They're not particularly well coached, and they are duct taped together by a Hall of Fame level quarterback, Russell Wilson. The Jamal Adams trade felt desperate. It felt like an older coach trying to win that year. I like Jamal. 2 first-rounders, a third, and a player. For a safety, not even Ed Reed probably worth that. Seattle is soft. They're noisy. They're mistake-prone. They're a shell of themselves, and Russell Wilson should not tolerate this. They're just too desperate recently. They give away draft picks like dentists give away floss. Everything's about now because Pete's older, and since Paul Allen passed away, he's taken total control of the franchise. I don't like their drafts. They've whiffed on several first-round picks. I mean, whiffed. Rashad Penny, I said it the day they picked him. I had other GMs laughing at that pick. I don't like this franchise right now. Got to come to terms with it. They're not well coached. They're not well run. They feel outdated. They're noisy in the offseason. They're mistake-prone.
Okay, so first of all, we have to be clear here that Colin Cowherd is well connected to Mark Rodgers and the Wilson camp. So a lot of what he's saying is from the position of, I am close to that camp. And there may well be some agendas that feed through into what Colin says, and he's been on this kind of bandwagon for a few years now, as you mentioned in the piece in another section. But at the same time, Brian, he goes into the kind of details with the Seahawks that I don't think most national people would. When he's talking directly about their drafts and their coaching and Russell Wilson's, it feels like, yes, okay, it's Colin Cowherd, he's going to go over the top, but at the same time that he is, whether it's because he's from the region or because of his connections to the Wilson camp, he is speaking from, let's say, it's more than an educated guess that he's pontificating on here. So I kind of feel obliged to listen to what he's saying for that reason, even if it's just to get an indication, as was with Greg Olsen before the game, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, that these people are saying these things for a reason, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it rings true. Some of it, I find the whole age thing with Pete to be a really odd, it's an overplayed argument. I hear it with fans all the time, especially younger fans. I don't hear anyone complaining about Bill Belichick's age or Andy Reid's age or, the guy down in Tampa Bay, I'm forgetting his name, who won the Super Bowl last year. Former Arizona coach.
Oh, bloody hell, I've forgotten it. Honestly, for the last 2 days, I've just forgotten a whole bunch of names. I'm not joking. On a drive back from London yesterday, I was like, what's that guy's name? And now you've just done the same for me with the Bruce Arians.
Thank you. Yes. So all those guys are like, similar ages. I think the age thing is bullshit. I mean, sorry, I don't know if I can say that on your pod, but I don't really believe in it. What I do believe is that, and I also call BS on this notion that because Paul Allen's gone, Pete had total control. Pete had total control before. I think he had more oversight before with Paul, for sure. So I believe in that. But I think there's a potential for people to diminish what Pete did at the beginning of this franchise with what he's done now. And here's what I mean by that, Rob. What I see has happened is that Pete actually was a cheat code when he came back because he had been at USC, which was one of the best programs in the country, had been recruiting players all over the country, knew the talent inside and out. And I don't think it was an accident that the first 3 years, the Seahawks had 3 of the best drafts and accumulations of talent that the NFL's ever seen in a 3-year period. He knew a lot of those guys. He was feeding in what he knew he wanted on defense with what players were available and working with Schneider. So like a lot of people gave like Scott's, what's his name? Guy that left and went to Washington. McLuhan, thank you. A ton of credit. And he does. He's a great evaluator of talent. Pete was a big part of talent evaluation those first few years. And after those first few years, he ran out of that inside knowledge. He was no longer part of the recruiting classes and didn't know as much about the players. And so he started relying more on, the Ed Orgerons and the other people and the Jim Nagy's and the other people that maybe were involved with the college game. And I think he started relying more on the assistant coaches to work with the personnel people. And frankly, the assistant coaches weren't great, especially later on. Did anyone really trust Tom Cable to advise John Schneider about which types of offensive linemen he liked? No. So I don't think it's an age thing. I do think that Pete's magic fairy dust has gone in terms of personnel. And I think that his advantage in terms of the type of defense he ran, the scheme, and the players, the tall corners, the rangy corners, there was no one that was a 6'3" corner back then, So I think a lot of those bag of tricks has been exhausted. So I think it is a challenge for where he is. And it is a valid reason to say, hey, maybe it's time for a different person to come in. I think the part that gets diminished is the wrong word. The part that gets underplayed, in my opinion, is Russell's responsibility in this situation. I think that this franchise has been built. Russell's the guy that said, surround me with blue chips, surround me with superstars. So I don't think Russell is one to complain about getting an all-pro added to the team because they're not choosing to come here necessarily. They have to be brought here. But the team surrounded him with top shelf receiver talent and invested in getting better offensive linemen and better tight ends and went through 3 different offensive coordinators and went from a run heavy offense to a super pass heavy offense back to a more balanced. There's been a lot done to help amplify what Russell can be. And I think there has to be at least some scrutiny about whether Russell has reached his limit and whether he's a quarterback that is in the class of quarterbacks that you can build around and he will help you win the Super Bowl if he's the centerpiece versus, a complimentary, great quarterback like a Matt Stafford, in Los Angeles who couldn't do it in Detroit on his own, but might be able to do it in Los Angeles. He's surrounded by a bunch of other great players. So that's a question for me. And to be totally honest, I've seen enough evidence that I feel like Russell is part of the problem in terms of the limits of what he's capable, the types of throws that he's capable of repeatedly doing, that make it hard to build an offense around him. So that's part of my question. And he's 33, turning 34. So I'm not against keeping him, but I don't think it's as obvious as everyone makes it out that you got to keep Russ and build around him.
That's an interesting point. I want to come back to the Russell stuff as well. I think that all quarterbacks essentially are complementary quarterbacks. I mean, I think, as good as Tom Brady is, he did it with a loaded roster last year. I think that some of the reasons why Aaron Rodgers has not been back to the Super Bowl is not so much because Rodgers himself it's because of the Green Bay defense. It's been because of poor coaching, decision making, kicking a field goal, when you're, a few yards out at the end of the game against Tampa Bay last year. It's stuff like that. Everything has to be the complete circle that Carroll talks about has some legitimacy, I think. And I think that there is something to be said for that. All quarterbacks sort of need that. I want to come back to Wilson, though. I think with Carroll, I think you raised a really good point there about him here and John Schneider. People are itching to take credit away from 2010. And Scott McCloughan, who may well have had a big impact there, gets just too much of that because it's convenient if you want to criticize Carroll and Schneider to pass it on to somebody else. I think even to pass it on to Carroll and just assume he just knew everybody in college. I think what they had was a clear vision of what they wanted to be, the kind of team that they wanted. They went and got the players that fit the kind of team that they wanted to be. They nailed a franchise quarterback in round 3, which is unheard of. They pulled off 2 of the best free agent additions in NFL history in Bennett and Averill, which was a miracle when that happened. And they had the foresight to trade for Marshawn Lynch, who became a legend in Seattle. When you have an accumulation of genius moves that all come off, you end up with a legendary roster, which is what they had, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that. And furthermore, they deserve the opportunity to get the reset wrong. They fully. When people were saying it's time to move on after 2017, no, I think that the franchise had a duty to say, guys, go and have another go at rebuilding this. It hasn't worked, but that's fine. I don't really have an issue with that as long as the Seahawks acknowledge that just because it's not worked now, they get another go, and they make the situation worse. I think my biggest issue now is that they contradict the philosophy and the vision that they want. They draft. They say they want to be this kind of team and then draft for the opposite. They have obviously not drafted well, period. They've not, and I know you guys have talked a lot about this. I don't understand the thought process that is, we can get BJ Finney, Cedric Abui, and Brandon Shell for the cost of Jack Conklin. And then Jack Conklin's an all-pro in his first year in Cleveland, and BJ Finney's playing for somebody else. It's that, to me, doesn't make sense, and neither did we need to fix the pass rush. We prioritize Clowney. He's not coming for what we'll offer. We'll wait 6 months and then lose out, and then we'll just go and throw everything at Jamal Adams because we're desperate. Yeah. That's not good. And I think the other problem, Brian, and I'm interested in your view on this, is Carroll's unwillingness to cede control in terms of philosophy a little bit. So I think if he was willing to just be an overseer, you may well have heard me banging on about this in the past, so apologies if you have. But if he was just concentrate on the culture building and leadership and the motivation and the figurehead nature of being a head coach, appoint an offensive coordinator and give him the keys to the offense, appoint a defensive coordinator and give him the keys to the defense. You just be the man who is at the top of the tree, who just connects everything together, that makes sure that complete circle is there. I think if he did that, there's every chance that he could continue to be a fantastic head coach for the Seahawks. But I don't think he's willing to do that. He's so focused on, this is the vision, this is the philosophy. I need my defensive coordinator who's underqualified for the job, but he's my defensive coordinator. He will do what I want. We're going to get Shane Waldron kind of through gritted teeth. And then when I'm asked to, I'm asked a softball question by Mike Salt to basically just throw him a bone, give him some praise after the Indianapolis game. The one thing I'm going to pick is his willingness to not change some of the things that we've always done. That's the one thing that you're going to pick out that he did well in that game. You could have said anything. Could have said the movement, pre-snap. You could have said that one pass that Wilson threw, that was all Shane. He designed that. No, it's his willingness to stick to the old way of doing things. And it's this kind of maybe a little bit of stubbornness, a little bit of control that I think has turned off the quarterback, which has created the drama. I do think that the Wilson drama, as much as they try and play it down, is having an impact, because Wilson will have friends in the locker room who agree with him 100%. And there may well be people who think that Wilson talks out of his arse. And maybe that's one of the reasons why this isn't really working right now, because you've kind of got a bit of a fractured locker room and people are wondering what the future holds. Where's the quarterback going to be next year? Do players look at Seattle and see it as a bit of a mess? Because, well, I could go there, but what if Russell Wilson's gone in a year and I'm lumbered with a friend in the middle of, I'm from Florida or Georgia and now I'm in Seattle and I'm stuck here and all my family's over there and I don't even have a franchise quarterback anymore. I think all of this on top of the bad drafting and the bad signing and the contradictory, it's all, as much as everything worked, Brian, in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013 to create this roster, it's almost like the opposite's happening now. You've got a lot of bad things combining to create this.
I think a lot of that makes sense to me, Rob. I think a couple of things I might say a little bit differently or see a little bit differently is I think finding really good coaches is almost as hard, maybe as hard as finding really good players. And so what I think we often observe in the NFL is that a coach has a pedigree. Either they came up through the offensive side or they came up through the defensive side. Sometimes you have like a Harbaugh, in Baltimore, who's a special teams coach, those happen. But generally you have a coach that is going to sit on one side of the ball and really understand it well. And then they're going to hire somebody that is complementary. So Mike Holmgren famously had Fritz Shurmur, and unfortunately Fritz Shurmur passed away before he was ever able to really help in Seattle. But Holmgren struggled to find a defensive guy on, opposite him for years. No one doubted that Holmgren was spending his time with the offense or that was a problem. Like, that's where he should spend his time. Pete Carroll has built generationally good defenses in multiple eras of the NFL, 80s, 90s, and now in the 2010s. So he is he's been a defensive guy, and I don't have a problem with him investing more in the defensive side of the ball. I agree that he should relinquish more of the control on the offensive side. But one of the things I guess I see is last year, like, there's been multiple times that this team has been among the most pass-heavy teams in the NFL. It wasn't just last year. There's other times that has happened. I think 2017, if I remember right. Anyway, there's been other times. And that's not Pete being inflexible. That is Pete being pretty flexible. And they have prioritized bringing in skill players and receivers over some other beefier options that they could have done that, for me, felt very much like they were trying to prioritize, the quarterback and give him what he needed. So I think the key here, from my perspective, is if it's not Pete, and I'm not at all sold that it needs to be Pete, who is it? Because they're going to have to make these decisions. And, I've lived through the Tom Floreses and the Dennis Ericksons and the Jim Mora Juniors and the Tim Ruskells. And I know how hard it can be and how many years you can spend just trying to find somebody who has a real vision, who's a program builder, the way Pete Carroll was when he came here. And so I just don't assume that the next person they bring in is gonna be better or make better choices. And there's going to be some hard choices to make. Russell Wilson being the biggest choice whoever comes in here has to make, for the reasons you're bringing up, I think, that are valid.
Yeah, I think some interesting points. I'm going to ask you generally what you, and again, I know it's quite early to talk about this, and some people are willing to answer this question, some are not, and it's up to you how deep you want to go into it, Brian. I'm going to sort of offer a brief outline of what I want to see, and feel free to do the same. I think just quickly on the coaching point, I think you are right. It is difficult to find coaches, and sometimes it's unpredictable who the great ones are. So a case in point, I can remember when the Chargers were looking for a head coach in the off season, and they were being linked with, for example, Brian Daboll. And I think that there was a connection between the GM and Daboll, and it just assumed that was going to what was happening. And you thought, hey, he's done a great job with Josh Allen. What a perfect thing for Justin Herbert. And then Brandon Staley gets the job completely out of the blue. And I'm thinking, why have they done that? They've got a defensive coordinator of the Rams to go, yeah, okay, they're the number one defense, but surely this is about getting a coach that's going to work with Justin Herbert. And then I can remember watching Staley's introductory press conference and just thinking, okay, now I know why they've appointed him. Because I bet even if that GM in LA was thinking, Darboll's the guy, but we'll interview this guy anyway, I bet he just, as soon as he walked out the room, he was like, that's our head coach. And you don't know who the great head coaches are sometimes until you've actually got that intimate knowledge of who they are.
Agreed. And just, I know you want to move on, but on that point, what I think a lot of people don't think about is who is going to be the person to hire that next head coach. So there was Todd Lewicki in place in the 2010 timeframe, 2009, who was able to say, you know what, I mean, it was very rare to hire a person. Jim Mora Jr. had been kind of cultivated to be the next head coach. He was like the assistant coach that kept him around, whatever. And then he sucked. The team quit on him. It was clear he was not the right coach. That's very rare. I bet you could count on one hand, maybe two, how many times a coach has lasted 1 year as head coach in the NFL. So you have to have someone at the decision-making level to say, nope, not going to work, and to have the foresight to hire well. Hiring well is not easy. And so now Paul Allen's gone. You don't have a Todd Lewicki. We don't know how Jody Allen will run. If she would run the hiring thing, will she hire a committee, like a search committee, to go out and figure this out? Because those often stink. You know, is Burt Cold, Paul Allen's old friend, going to have a heavy hand? He did with the Trailblazers a number of times. Will he here? Is it Chuck Arnold? Like, there's a lot of unproven open questions about who's going to make that choice. And fans don't have any idea about those people. But yet they're saying, get rid of the guy that has had the most success in the history of Seahawks franchise. And I get why. But I don't personally, I'm open to that. I just don't personally assume that we're going to end up in a better place. I'm still willing to take the risk, but I just think people are underestimating the risk in that hiring process.
And I think it's a fair argument to have. I think, and it's a debate that fans should have rather than just fire or keep. You know, there's nuance that needs to be discussed within, you know, what the changes are. Before I sort of go through what I think should happen in 2022, let me ask you this. Have you noticed anything different about Pete Carroll this year? Because to me, he seems different. His body language, his press conferences, his mannerisms, it seems a lot more downbeat. And maybe that's just because of what's happened. But I've detected a difference in him. Have you noticed anything there?
Yeah, I don't think it's just him. I mean, I've detected it in him and John Schneider and Russell, in Bobby to some extent. But you know, it's a long time. God, I mean, anyone that's been married, God, being married for 10 years is a long time. Not a lot of people make it that far. So this is their work marriage, you know, their work spouses. And, you know, think about how, I mean, we all know it's public knowledge at this point. How many times did Pete have to fight back internal strife that was, you know, pushing back against Russell Wilson or against something else? You know, like, how much turmoil do we not know about? That's just the stuff we do know about. So he's had that. Then meanwhile, he's been defending him and building around him, but then it hasn't worked out. And so now maybe he's seeing some of those flaws. And does he have the stomach to go through and change? Like, there's just a lot of human stuff there to go through. And people are like, oh, he's 70. He doesn't want to do a rebuild. Whether it's because of his age, I think I could absolutely see Pete looking at another situation and being like, yeah, I would rebuild. I just don't want to do it here. Too many skeletons, too many of the same people, need a fresh start. So yeah, I agree. I think he's seemed lower energy and lower enthusiasm, and part of it because they're playing like crap. But yeah, I don't think it's just him.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right to mention John Schneider. And you know, I had a theory during the offseason that I don't think if John Schneider wasn't open to some kind of change with the quarterback, then he wouldn't have even driven to or flown to North Dakota to meet with Ryan Pace. That he had that conversation, and the report was that he presented an offer to Carroll that Carroll said no, which to me, and again, I might be reading too much into it, I read the tea leaves on that as Schneider is open to this, and Carroll ultimately needs to decide whether he is, and decided no. But then if Carroll decides I'm going back to USC, and you know, there's, funnily enough, out of nowhere, an article emerges with Carroll talking about USC in the LA Times. Why? And people go, he says at the end, they don't need me. Well, yeah, but he's just distancing himself right now because he's in the job. Right. But all of a sudden, people are going, is Pete putting the feelers out there? Is he having a look to see if there's any kind of interest? Because, that'd be convenient. I get to carry on coaching. I get to go back to California. I get to get some sun. I get to sort of churn the roster every 4 years, and because the guys will move on, I can go and they need a big name. You know, USC. It's almost too perfect. The timing of all of this.
Yep. Be around kids, change his legacy. You know, at that school where he left in some turmoil, and
bit more time for the old podcasts and stuff like that. You know, it's
yeah. Well, I mean, you're a journalist, Rob. When I saw that article, it did not feel natural. There's been USC openings multiple times, and people have asked, but that was a pretty hefty article just with Pete about that job. That seemed conspicuous to me. I tweeted about it. I'm sure you saw it. So yeah, like my feelers definitely went up there. I was like, okay, this seems odd. We'll see.
Yeah, we will see, but it feels like it's something that's just going to stick in the back of our minds for the rest of the season here as to how this might play out. But okay, let's get on to the plan. What I would like to see, I take on board everything you've said about difficulty in finding coaches. I still subscribe a little bit to, I want to give the Seahawks with Wilson and an offensive-minded head coach a chance before I draw a line under the Wilson era. I at least like to sort of see what that looks like before trading him, let's say. So I would like to, I think that there has to be some changes in terms of, I think maybe Schneider needs to move on, and that an offensive-minded head coach needs to come in who Wilson can have a connection with, and they can be Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes just in Seattle. That they've on the same page in terms of what they want this to look like moving forward. That they get a very experienced defensive coordinator. I'd like to see them shift resources. So Bobby Wagner's cap hit is $20 million next year. I think he's going to be 32 or 33. I don't think you can justify that. You're going to save $16, $17 million from moving on. I think that money can be better spent up front on the O-line or the D-line. Go and get some cornerbacks. I think it's long overdue that the Seahawks could get a running back who can actually stay on the field and actually have opponents sort of thinking we've got to account for him somewhat. And look, I'm not saying that they should just run the ball, relentlessly, but I do think that, the complementary football offense and defense for me means good pass rushing, cornerbacks who can cover, and then an offense, the ability to protect, the ability to run the ball when you want to. And I think if the Seahawks can get into that kind of position, then I would like to give that a shot before we just blow everything up and say, baby out with the bathwater. It's rebuild time. It's get what you can for Wilson. I'm watching college football every week, and every week that goes by, I'm waiting for that quarterback to emerge who's going to be the number 1 overall pick next year, and it never happens. Yeah. In fact, they're going backwards. Spencer Rattler, he's going to be a top 5 pick. Everyone's saying in the national media in the summer, he just got benched. He may have to transfer and play somewhere else next year to repair his stock. There just aren't the players out there right now, and there's nobody down the road. There's no Trevor Lawrence waiting in the wings that you think in 2 years he's going to be available. It's a scary time for teams that need quarterbacks. Now, on the offset of that, maybe Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson and players like that are going to be available. So maybe a little swap, Wilson goes somewhere, you use the stock to bring in Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But I just think that I would like to see Wilson and the Seahawks do this. And then if that doesn't work, maybe it's time to part. And I'd like to think that there's the opportunity to do that first and see how it goes, and everybody get on board with that before you completely write this off. Because at least my understanding is that Wilson, as much as he is agitated a little bit to move, it's more because he doesn't believe in the philosophy that Carroll has anymore, rather than a real desperate desire to get out of Seattle per se. I know people often say, oh, his wife wants to go to New York or Las Vegas. I think that's BS as well. Yeah. I think it's just a case of he wants to go somewhere with an offensive-minded head coach and do things differently. I think Greg Olson spelled it out. He feels confined within the philosophy, and I think he wants to try something else. Let's give something else a try in Seattle, and then if that doesn't work, we know what's going to happen.
I think that's a very pragmatic step forward. Here's where, let's play that out for a second, and the best way to probably explain where my hesitation is with it. So let's say that it goes the best possible way you can imagine. So let's take for Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, as you used. Like, can agree that's probably his best case scenario you can hope for, right? Like, those two are just a fantastic combination. That offense is just amazing. But then you look at Kansas City this year, and they just got their asses kicked by the Bills because their defense is horrible. They didn't win the Super Bowl last year. I think there's a decent chance that Andy Reid will not win another Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes as quarterback. I'm not saying it's certain, but
I'm not sure he'll coach much longer given his health.
Oh no, but point being, like, let's say that you get the best possible match offensive philosophy with Russell Wilson, but the defense is still not good enough to contend. So then you've got a 35-year-old Russell Wilson with still not a good enough team to contend. It's hard for me to imagine how that's going to result in a team that's ready to truly contend within 2 years, 3 years. And if not, then you're getting up to a 36, maybe 37-year-old Russell Wilson. And that's only with the best case scenario that you get the best match with Russell. If you get someone that isn't a great match, or you find out actually, the fourth offensive mind to match with Russell and it's still not working out, maybe it is some limits to Russell. And maybe over the next few weeks, we start to see Geno Smith make some throws that we like, oh my God, I forgot we haven't seen that throw for 10 years because that's not a throw that Russell likes to make.
Well, were you chanting Geno's name on
yeah, well, I was chanting a lot of things. I don't know if that was one of them. But point being, I think that is a conservative approach. And my concern is that that's going to prolong the time it takes for this team to get back to truly having a chance to contend. And it is eliminating your number one chit to play to get an injection of youthful talent, which is a great franchise quarterback who's still young enough. Russell could play another 10 years. So I don't think his value is going to be any higher than it's going to be now. I think you can get multiple picks, maybe even a young quarterback in return for him, potentially. And then figure out how to go from there. So I guarantee you people have already determined that I don't like Russell Wilson for all sorts of reasons that I've been looking for reasons. I don't like if there's a path, it is going to be very, very hard, if not impossible, to find the next Russell Wilson quality quarterback. 100%. I care most about figuring out a way to win another Super Bowl. And I just wonder if the time frames of his career and the Seahawks' ability to reach it are going to match up. And so that's where, for me, I think we only have 1, maybe 2 years to really figure out whether he's part of it or not. And if you wait too long, you've missed it. I think we could be a decade. It could really, if you don't get it right with Russell and this next coach, you could be delaying getting back to a great roster a long time.
Yeah. One of the things that I find is interesting about this is I went to London on Sunday and I watched the Jets against the Falcons. I was particularly interested in this game because I kind of felt like, okay, I'm going to get to see a quarterback drafted second overall, and I'm going to get to see a quarterback who may well be available in the next offseason for probably little compensation. The Falcons are the type of team that would ask probably for a first round pick for Matt Ryan, pushing 40, but in reality, they would get much less. And I sat there and watched, and my lasting thoughts were Zach Wilson is not ready to play in the NFL. And I loved him at BYU, and I didn't feel like I was watching the same player. And it's a real reminder of the difference between the two levels. And then the other thing was Matt Ryan had a pretty productive game, but he was playing the Jets, and the Jets are not a good team. And his arm strength looked absolutely shot. And when I was sat there, I was thinking, okay, so bear in mind there is not the Trevor Lawrence type sort of sat waiting for you in the draft. Do I want to take a punt on a Zach Wilson? Do I want to go down the Matt Ryan, or do I want to? And it really sort of focused my mind on pursuing with Wilson. And I think you make some very valid points in terms of, now's the time. If you're going to do the move, do it now. I just fear a little bit because there is so much of an unknown. And I think with ownership, people assume that. I think people make wrong assumptions with this ownership, by the way. I think they think that because they gave Carroll the 5-year contract a year ago, that basically they just want to go, just get on with it. And I think it's not I've voiced that assumption plenty of times myself. You know, a lot of us have kind of just thought that's their mindset. And I think in an ideal world, they hoped that Schneider and Carroll, 5 years, maybe they'll sell the team within that 5 years. Who knows? But they'll keep things ticking over. Worst case scenario, they'll be a playoff team for 5 years. No one's going to complain at us. I mean, it's fine. We don't have to worry about it. But I actually think that when they signed that contract, Carroll, they were 6-1, and it was before the Buffalo game. And a lot's changed since then. And now we're getting to a point where maybe he's going to retire, maybe he's going to go to USC, maybe they need to step in, and we don't know how they're going to act. We don't know what if this team finishes 5-12, are they just going to go, oh, well, it's okay, just have another go? Are they going to naively allow this franchise to go into an off season where everybody knows what will happen if it ends like that, where you're going to have a quarterback demanding to leave, you're going to have to deal with that situation, you're going to have to make a choice as to whether you want to do that or not. There's not going to be a marriage of convenience for another year. It's either going to be divorce or you make a coaching change. I don't know if they're just going to sit idly by and not get involved. And whoever it is, whether it's Jody Allen, Chuck Arnold, Paul Allen's mate, whoever it is, I think that they may well be more active than we think. And there's all this unknown, which creates I think some anxiety amongst fans, because you kind of want to know where you're going, and you kind of it wants to be more predictable than this. But going back to the point about Wilson, I did just watching that game on Sunday, it made me think I'm not sure I want to just move on from Wilson, because as clearly as flawed as he has been this season, and there have been some halves where the offense just grinds to a halt, and you're kind of thinking they can't even get a yard here, let alone a first down. I mean, how many yards did they have in the first half against the Niners? Like -8 at one point, compared to 200 for the Niners, and that was the game that they won. And you think, and you think of all this, and you think this is really bad, and then you kind of look at the PFF grade, and you think he's the second highest rated quarterback in the league, even after.
I think that is a crazy grade.
And he has, but he has.
I want to get into PFF stuff because I generally give them a lot of leeway, and they watch all the tape. Like, having been at that game and watched receivers run open that were not getting the ball, I don't know how he could have had a grade that high.
But there's also a
action that he took. I mean, anyway.
But he has a 10-1 TD to interception ratio as well, and that's the other confusing thing, because you don't know how to handle that as well. Because on the one hand, 10 years ago, you'd have killed for a quarterback with that kind of ratio at this stage in the season. And now we kind of look at it and think, I don't know how to balance the flaws that he has versus the brilliance that he has versus the kind of wanting more from him, acknowledging that he can't throw over the middle as well as we all want him to. But at the same time, those deep throws, and he throws some of the most beautiful passes any of us will ever see. 100%. And it's just all in the melting pot. And you kind of like, people's opinions are all over the place, when really it's so difficult to know exactly what the answer is.
Well, here's the thing, Rob, and lost in all the BS on Twitter and everyone having hot takes and priors that they want to confirm and team this and team that. The Seahawks are in a pickle. Like, that's just the reality. You can keep Wilson and try that route. There's a ton of risk that will not work, and that you're going to set the roster back many, many more years by going that direction. That's just a reality. You can say that's how you want to go, but there are real risks with that path. You can get rid of Wilson. Changing your coach and your GM potentially, and your and getting rid of a franchise quarterback and expecting to hit the lottery on all of them. Good luck. Tons of risk there. Higher risk, potentially higher reward, I would say, that route. The more that you change out, the more the potential is for change. It sounds obvious, but it's true. So anyone that says, oh, this is the absolute right way to go, anyone that says different is an idiot. They're just a blowhard. The fact of the matter is, because of the way the Seahawks have chosen to try to be a championship caliber team every year and not reset, but reload. I don't think they've done a reset. They've done constant reloads. Mariners fans will know what the difference is. They are in a real bind, and there's high risk every direction from here. If your goal is to get back to winning a Super Bowl, there's high risk every direction. And the most likely outcome is the Seahawks aren't going to be anywhere near as good the next 10 years as they've been the last 10 years. That's the most likely outcome. You have to hope that they get someone at the top of the decision-making process for football, whether it's Pete or someone replaces Pete, who's great. That is, to me, more important than Russell Wilson, is more important than the GM. Like, whoever that person is has to be great, and they have to have a clear vision.
And that's the hardest thing.
If he's not, great. You know,
and that's the hardest thing, Brian, is none of us know who that person is, because none of us can say that's a person at some random franchise who we've never heard speak. We don't know what their vision is, what their philosophy is. We have no idea who that person is, but we need them.
Exactly. And you know what? I mean, if you're a franchise that's willing to do what you did with Jim Mora Jr. and say, hey, we hired this person, we rolled the big dice, and it turns out they were wrong. We found someone else we think is right now. Great. I'm all for that. I'm all for changing like the person every year or 2 years if they're not clearly making steps and have a clear like confidence building plan in place. Fine. Urban Meyer, like a lot of people would have thought that was a great hire. Now they're like, whoa. So yeah, like I think that's what I want to see is bold moves. The boldest move is a total reset. Everyone involved with decision making and the roster, pretty much. And I think people focus on Russell, but as you said, like even if you get it right with Russell and a coach around him, the rest of the roster has to work. Someone has to figure out what to do with Jamal Adams because he's going to be around for a little bit. Bobby Wagner's not getting any younger. Jordan Brooks is not working at linebacker right now. Like, anyway, the issues go. A cornerback's a disaster, right? So, like, there's work to. Dwayne Brown is not getting any younger. Left tackle's a huge need. So, there's a lot of things that are just. Even if you get right with Russell and a new coach, someone's going to have to come in and really figure out how to turn this roster over. I think it's going to be hard for it to be good with Russell still around, not because of Russell, but because of all the other problems that have to be addressed.
And I just wonder, how do you think, I mean, we can talk about this, and obviously this is my opinion, it's your opinion. What is the pulse of the fan base right now, do you think?
I was surprised, at least, I've got my own corner of Twitter that I see. I was surprised how many different fans were supportive of the article I wrote saying that it's time for a total reset. I expected a lot of pushback. The most pushback I get is, I think, similar to what you and I've talked about tonight. Do you keep Russell or not? Right? Like, Russell's not the problem. Russell just needs a good coach. Talent's not the problem. We just need a good coach. I think that's what most people want to believe because it's easier. It's more hopeful to believe that. So yeah, that's I think the general gist is I think people are ready for it. They're primed. They're finally ready for big change. I think most people are ready for a change at the coaching level. I think the least amount of people are ready for a change at the quarterback level, but I think there's more people ready for a change at the quarterback level than there's ever been during Russell Wilson's tenure. So it's not an insignificant number, in my opinion.
I wanted to bring, I can't believe I've got 53 minutes into a stream, and Brian, very much appreciate your time and have not mentioned the name of Jamal Adams at any point during this. That is people will tell you that's very rare, Brian, on one of these streams that we do. But Corbin Smith put out a tweet earlier that Jamal Adams has played nearly 40% of Seattle snaps as a free safety this year. He played 19% last year. And he comments that that seems like a waste of his greatest strengths. I think this is part of one of the bigger issues. And you can talk about there's all kinds of things that are issues right now. I don't understand how this team have come to the decision that that's how they want to use Jamal Adams, that this is the best way to utilize him. I mean, you've made the trade. We all know what Jamal Adams was in New York. We all know how Greg Williams used him to great effect. And, I was a bit surprised that they made the trade because I didn't think he particularly fit their scheme. But what they seem to have done, Brian, is having had him for a year and having kind of tried to use him a little bit like the Jets did, they've decided that, no, what the best thing to do is try and fit him into our way of doing things and make him into something that is probably not his best fit. And I I don't know. I kind of feel like this has to be the tipping point now. I want to see him against the Steelers playing closer up at the line of scrimmage. I want to see him attacking. And if that means you're a little bit more exposed in the secondary as a consequence, then so be it. Because otherwise, what's the point of having him on the field? You might as well just play Ryan Neal or somebody else. Use him the way that he should be used.
I mean, Rob, but if you do that, there's a chance you might have the worst defense and the worst passing defense in the NFL. We couldn't do that. Oh, wait, we already have those. So, yeah, I mean, I'll say this, because it's easy to second guess. I've been supportive of the Seahawks looking to play more sound defense with Jamal Adams as part of that. And I think Jamal Adams has been supportive of that, wanting to be more than just a, blitz boy, as everyone jokes about, right? I think he's more talented than that. I think he has more to offer than that. I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's my perspective, having watched him with the Jets. I think he's a supremely talented safety. What made no sense to me was how they utilized him against the Rams, a team that had given up almost no pressure all year, 3 sacks coming into the game, and you knew you were going to have to speed up Matt Stafford. And you'd just seen Ryan Neal play well against San Francisco. I just was shocked that we did not see more of Jamal Adams creating more pressure and blitzing. Maybe Sean McVay and Matt Stafford have proven clearly on tape that blitzing is just a bad idea at all times, and you just shouldn't do that. And to the coach's credit, the first half of that game, I don't know if anyone's played the Rams better this season for 2 quarters than the Seahawks defense did for those first 2 quarters. So something was working, and then it wasn't. So, Carroll's comments, after that game seemed to come back. He referenced the Minnesota game, that making the same mistakes. It sounds like there's been some coverage mistakes and discipline mistakes. And so who knows? I mean, it's so easy as a fan to come in and just be like, yep, low PFF grade, Jamal Adams cost all this. Let's just beat up Jamal Adams. And fine. I mean, fans can be pissed about whatever they want to be pissed about. I just think there's a lot more to it than that, unfortunately. And I wish it was just a one-player problem. I'm not even sure Jamal Adams is the biggest problem on the defense.
What do you think? Is it cornerback?
I think linebacker has been a pretty big contributing factor too. I think people, do not necessarily understand how much Jordan Brooks is contributing to problems in coverage. And I mean, people should remember, and I know a lot of people do, KJ Wright played next to Bobby for many, many years and was excellent at being disciplined in coverage. And everybody does know he was one of the best in the NFL at diagnosing screenplays and stopping them. What's been a major problem for the Seahawks this year? Diagnosing screenplays and stopping them. I've just seen Jordan Brooks trailing and out of position time and time again. I think he's a huge issue. And unfortunately, Cody Barton got a lot of chances because Jordan Brooks was playing bad, and Cody Barton was just as bad, if not worse. So, yeah, I think that there's no shortage. I think the corners have been bad. I do think that I think that DJ Reed's played better the last couple of games, but I don't know, man. When your defense is this bad, it's not one player and it's not a simple solve.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of issues. It's not just Jamal Adams. I think it's still a terrible trade.
Oh, I think no one can argue anything but that at this point. Yeah. There's no credible argument that was not a terrible trade.
I think I'd like to see him used as, and it's not something I think Carroll's ever sort of settled on for his defense. I don't think he feels comfortable using a player like this. I'd like to see them use. Can you remember I can't remember the guy's name. It's another one of those. I've forgotten his name. The guy who was with the Cardinals for a long time, Deion Buchanan. Just use him like that. As a death backer type thing. And let's just give that a try, and then maybe gets Ryan Neal a bit more on the field as well, because he's actually seems like one of the players that can play well and is worth that. I think you make a very good point about Jordan Brooks. I was actually just having a look at, which offensive linemen and centers and stuff were around. I can remember thinking, you know what, a linebacker at the end of the first round. I think they did it because they thought that KJ Wright wasn't going to play last year, but even still.
I liked it a lot better than drafting running back at the first round, or drafting a clearly crappy Jermaine Ifedi, or whatever else they've done in the first round. So I liked the pick at the time, to be honest. I liked the pick going into this year. I thought he looked like he was going to be an ascending player, and he just has fallen on his face. He's not been good.
Yeah, but we're going to wrap up. I think we'll just sort of have a final thought, and we'll wrap up, Brian, because we've kept you for an hour, and much appreciated for that. I can tell you that this has been, our two most watched live streams have been the meltdown after the Minnesota Vikings game, which was just for like an hour, and this one. So it seems that the Seahawks are bad enough now that things like this can be popular and enjoyed, whereas like the tepid sort of moaning after a loss in a 12-4 season is not quite the same. But let's just have one final thought on the Steelers game that is coming up. Expectations for that, what you'd like to see, and I think that if the Seahawks could somehow go and win this game, then I think the mood will change quite a lot, because people will then start thinking, can they get through this stretch without Wilson? If Wilson comes back to a team that is somehow, 500 or whatever, or something similar to that, can you make a late run? We've seen teams do that in the past, when the Saints have had Drew Brees miss a few games, or the Packers have had Aaron Rodgers miss a few games. And, is that possible? I don't think it's the toughest run of games that they're going to have in the world coming up right now. But at the same time, I do fear a little bit that this could end up being a pretty ugly Sunday night football, and I'm well aware that I'm going to be staying up till 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the darn thing. So, what do you think of that game?
I think people focus too much on the opponents at this point with the Seahawks. The Seahawks have proven that they can lose to bad teams. They've proven that their offense cannot function against bad defenses. They've proven that their defense can slow good offenses, but then also hemorrhage yards like you've hit a major artery. So it'll be, I think, the things to watch. There's one thing to watch, and then there's a bunch of things that are just like kind of, I would say, tertiary, not even secondary. The thing to watch is Geno Smith. This is we don't get to see Pete Carroll get injured and watch another coach for the next 6 games or whatever it's going to be. Like, unfortunately, we don't get that.
He had that bruise on the side of his head. You never know.
Yeah. Maybe someone will galooly him. I don't know, but that's an old reference. But Russell Wilson's out, and as great as Russell Wilson is, there's limits to every quarterback. That they do things they do well and things that they don't do as well. Geno Smith did some things well in that game that Russell doesn't typically do well. How will that go with a team that gets to prepare for Geno Smith? My assessment of Geno Smith is he's a terrible quarterback and that he's going to be bad. That's my expectation. He turns the ball over a ton. I expect him to still do that because he just makes poor decisions. But I'm also just interested, does he throw slants more regularly? Does DK Metcalf get targeted more reliably? Does the tight end get involved better? Do screenplays get thrown on time? Does the ball get thrown away more often than taking a 12-yard or 15-yard sack? I'm interested in finding, can we start to suss out what are the things that are associated with Russell and what are the things that are associated with the coaching? I think it's a key learning point for all of us over the next few games to help answer the question you and I have been debating this whole time. So that's the number one thing I'll be watching. The outcome of the game, I wouldn't say I couldn't care less, because I always care if the Seahawks win, no matter what I say or how much I tell myself it doesn't matter. But I don't think it matters. Like, I don't think this, unless your big hope is the team makes a wild card and loses in the first round, or maybe possibly wins one game. Like, I just don't see this season being that meaningful. So, that is unfortunately where my head's at. I don't want to be the sad sack, but as I wrote earlier in my article, my focus now, I would already, I know it's not going to happen. I would be focusing on figuring out how many of my players I could move before the trade deadline and see what we could get in terms of draft capital now. That would be where if I was in charge, that's what I'd be doing.
Yeah, I think that in itself would be a fantastic conversation. I feel like there's like 3 hours worth of conversations to have about the Seahawks right now. We've done a good hour, and Brian, very much appreciate it. Are you doing a show this week?
Yes, absolutely. So folks can check us out. Obviously, the website, hawkblogger.com, easiest place to find all the content. You can go to the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/c/hawkblogger, RHT, Hawkblogger Real Hawk Talk, RHT. So we also do a patreon.com/hawkblogger for our community that we're building. So love to have people join that as well. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Pacific time, we will be doing our Real Hawk Talk, talking a lot about what we just discussed between you and me, Rob.
And a bit of golf this week or not, Brian?
Absolutely. Shot my best round over the weekend, and I'm heading back out tomorrow. So looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Look, Brian, it's been a pleasure having you on. I hope you've all enjoyed the debate. Apologies, I've not been sort of reading out the super chats. There's been so much, there's been a lot of arguing going on in the live chat. I've been kind of following it along. You know, whenever you get into Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll, there's going to be some arguing. So,
yes.
So I appreciate everybody who's been joining in with that. Big thank you to everybody who sent a super chat in. Join us back on Wednesday, 2:00. Jeff Simmons is going to join us for a good old chat about the Seahawks. Robbie and I will jump on and do a recording as well before the weekend, specifically looking ahead to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We might have other stuff as well. It's that kind of a week. It's that kind of a time for the Seahawks. Thanks to Brian again. Thank you to all of you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.